This is the Ramesseum, obviously named after Ramses. This is where you get the sense of scale, though. An important point that Stephen Mailer pointed out is if you look at the carvings on the left, they're different from the carvings on the right. Carvings on the left may be older. The carvings on the right are deeper, and they were most likely done for Ramses because there was a tendency during certain periods to deface the names of older so-called pharaohs. And so Ramses wanted to make sure, or his priest maybe wanted to make sure, that his name and all the writings about him were kept almost forever, and it would be very difficult to deface something that was so deeply cut into the stone like this. Now, we don't see so far any sign of lost ancient technology or super ancient work. This is all limestone, and again, according to Stephen and others, limestone was the preferred material afterwards because limestone was softer. You could work it with bronze chisels and stone hammers, but when it comes to carvings or buildings which were made of granite, basalt, or quartz, calcite, that requires tools that are harder than bronze. The question is, what tools were they? In the archaeological record, there are no tools, as far as I know, other than bronze chisels and stone hammers. So the harder stone is hinting at us that that work that was done is older than the pharaonic dynastic Egyptians. And like at any ancient site, you see different time periods existing. This, according to Yusuf Awiyan, is dynastic period. Again, they were working with limestone. Limestone is not very hard, so they could work it with bronze chisels and stone hammers. But these sculptures are granite. Granite is much harder, could not be properly shaped, especially not fine detail, with bronze chisels, stone hammers, and sandpaper. And possibly even more curious are the presence of the keystone cuts, which we find in different parts of the world, but they're most famous here and also in Peru and Bolivia. Keystone cuts for bronze or some kind of metal would be put in there supposedly to hold the stones together. But what you'll notice about these ones is you can see the tools that were used, chisels. So these are not especially sophisticated examples of them, but they're present nonetheless. So in terms of a sense of scale, again, this is the statue, or part of the statue. This is part of his head and his ear, and then coming down that way, his shoulder. 1,000 tons finished, one block of stone. Originally, of course, it would have been much more than 1,000 tons because it would have been a rough piece to start with.
Put your back into it. Stop mucking around.
Wow. And here you can see after it fell, as the result of an earthquake supposedly, somebody came along, and this is his head, and attempted to separate a section as building material, and of course they gave up because this is rose granite, which is super hard stone. So here's the bottom of part of the 1,000-ton statue, and I believe this is the base on which he stood, and just the size of his feet. Here's my hand in comparison. Or 1 foot compared to a foot. My foot's about the size of his toenail. So again, finished at 1,000 tons. So how did they move it 500 miles from the quarry at Asuáne? Most, if not all, of the rose granite came from the Asuáne quarry. And so how was it moved? How do you move 1,000 tons? You're not obviously going to move it on rollers across a desert. Another point to take into account here at the Ramesseum is here we have limestone, which is not a particularly hard stone, but these columns, as vast as they are, at least 20 feet high, you clearly see that they were done in sections, because you can see the seam as we go down, where the fill-in repair work is. So during dynastic times, when this was built, they were working with limestone and working it in sections. But as we go farther back in time, to the pre-dynastic period, when they're working with granite, diorite, and basalt, quite often that's megalithic. That's a single block of stone, sometimes a single column, a single header piece of stone of larger scale. So it's not simply the hardness of the stone. So you're looking at Luxor Temple, or a very small part of it here. The sound in the background is a mosque. And this is one of the faces reputed to be Ramses II that engineer Chris Dunn believes was done with ancient high technology, because he's found what he believes are machine tool marks inside the nostrils and cutters. He's found the actual machine tool marks on the face, because the precision of this sculpture is so fine that one side is a mirror image of the other side. And right next to this head of Ramses is an incredible obelisk. It's at least 8 feet on one side at the base, and I have no idea, it's got to be 60 feet tall. Made of rose granite, brought from the quarry at Asuáne. So these rose granite sculptures, which have to be 15 feet tall, that cartouche here was added later. The name of Ramses was put that after. So it's likely that this does not, the sculpture does not represent Ramses. It could be a lot older. And what Yusuf Awiyan pointed out, the first one has the cartouche there. The second one has the cartouche there. The third one doesn't. You see there's the cartouche with his name on it. Next to it is a dagger, but here the dagger's in the way of where it would be. So that's another sign with a great possibility that the hieroglyph does not name the original sculpture itself, but was added afterwards and possibly long after the carving was done. Copper chisels and stone hammers cannot achieve this work. This is the Rose Granite Quarry at Asuáne in Egypt. And this is where we will see the unfinished obelisk. In fact, two. The main unfinished obelisk, which is quite famous, is estimated at 1,200 tons in weight. And so we're going to have a look at that. We're also going to look at different ways that the granite was cut. Again here, the normal way. Again, you can see where the wedges were, how the stone has been broken off into, probably in attempted cubes, but in large block form. But underneath it is the older, what would one call it, but scooping kind of technology at work. And here we see this in the oldest structures in Peru, the pre-Inca works. And this is a classic example of it. Again, this was not done with a bunch of guys with stone pounders. This was done with a technology that, as far as I know, conventional Egyptologists can't explain, as well as pits in the ground like this. And over here. And also see the way that the stone is blistered. It's possible that some kind of heat was applied, or at least some way of destabilizing the stone in order to extract it. And this is a classic example here again.
Okay. The cracks on the earth, on the surface of modern earthquakes, they've been recorded. The crack that stopped them is on the underside. We went down there in 2004. To his credit, David Hatcher Childers found it. There's a crack on the underside. As Yusuf mentioned, they would then know that it would not go to resonance anymore, so no longer functional as an obelisk, so they stopped work. But Chris and I both believe they still would have used the stone and quarried it. What stopped it is the cataclysm. This is evidence of the cataclysm. That's why they stopped this work. So this piece is at least 12,000 years. So when you go down there, you can look at the scoop marks, make your own determinations how you think that possibly could be done with dolerite pounders or dolerite hammers, and you'll see the crack on the underneath, and you'll realize yourself, and you can go do your own.
Okay.
Good.
So we get an unprecedented experience. 2 minutes. This is the unfinished obelisk. We get to actually go in and have a close look at the marks. Oh, thank you. 1,200 tons. It's not only its size and its scale, but how the hell did they shape it? See how narrow the area is in here. So here, now you get a sense of scale. And it's around the side, this way. And now we get to actually go down into the pit. So this is the pit. This is the side of the obelisk. This is the wall. This is the way that it was shaped. Now if you have a dolerite pounder, or if you have a stone ball and you're this far away from it, I'm this far away, how can you possibly shape something this hard without having the ability to have the force to strike at it? You don't. So that blows. It doesn't matter how many, again, it's like in Peru, it doesn't matter how many people you have working at it. It's just silly to think that it was done by hand. All these scoops that we see are completely different than the conventional way of cutting and shaping granite in ancient times. And so it looks very much like there was some kind of scooping machine or mechanism that was able to cut out what this is. And this is, thank you, this is an unprecedented opportunity to look at one of the greatest achievements in situ. Inside we have the pit, one of the pits, and these are dolerite pounders. These are hard stone balls that would have been theoretically used to shape it, but the material is too hard for that to be an explanation. Again, very similar to what we see in Peru, evidence of ancient machining technology, and it's very fortunate that it's unfinished because it allows us to see the process in action. Okay, so here you get to see up close, or at least from above, the scale of the unfinished obelisk, 1,200 tons. You see the marks on the surface. Those are not the marks of somebody with stone hammers pounding away. These marks inside the groove, the channel on that side, those are not the marks of stone hammers. Those are the marks of ancient technology, because here, there we see, you see those tooth-like things, projections. Again, that's where wedges would have been put in conventional stone, hand stone extraction. But that is completely different from that. This is one of our prime examples of lost ancient technology. With the unfinished obelisk here, what's very, very intriguing is that you see the natural shape of the stone here in the quarry, the roundedness of it, and then swinging past the unfinished obelisk to this wall, which is mind-boggling. That is somewhat like what we see in Peru. For someone to tell me that that was a bunch of slaves doing this kind of work by hand, you know, talk to an engineer, talk to a stonemason. They'll laugh at you if you say that this was done by hand by a bunch of slaves. This is very much a candidate for lost ancient technology. The crispness of the cutting, the flatness of it. One doesn't leave a surface like that in a quarry in general, as far as I know. Absolutely incredible. And to show this is even more of a joke, this is a dolerite pounder. This is what many scholars believe is the technique used to extract the stone. This is the dolerite, this is the granite. Here we have
knowledge of electricity.
Yeah, here we have what looks very much like what we saw in Dendera.
In the crypts.
In the crypts, the so-called light bulbs. And here we have a depiction of something incredibly similar to that. The ones in Dendera are at an angle, these are vertical. The snake on the inside.
You're always representing Kundalini or electrical energy.
Yeah, Kundalini energy on the inside. So here's another good example of where it's this temple here. You can see granite, at least this part of it, is listed as being of the Ptolemaic period. Why? Because Alexander the Great's name is carved into the surface of the stone. And Yusuf will show us where we can find Alexander the Great's name.
Right here. These glyphs here are alphabet. It's not like the symbols we saw in the old kingdom time. So you have the letter A, L, K, S, N, D, R, E, S. Alexandris.
Ah, great.
And that's how they did the site to the Ptolemy period. But then when we see the devices inside, we're going to realize that it's pre-dynastic because the machining and because that it has no writings at all. And if you ask the Egyptologist why this device doesn't have writing, he can tell you it wasn't completed. But
exactly.
when you see it, you know that it was completed. all this part was quarried. There was several shrines as the one we see here. Go ahead.
So that gives you a prime example of where, just because it has writing on it, yes, that dates the writing, but it doesn't necessarily date the stone that it's written on. When you go from one culture to another culture, one time period to another time period, the succeeding culture inherits or steals the artifacts of the earlier culture. So if they do have a writing system, then the writing is put on top of something older. So the oldest things in Egypt do not have writing. Does that mean that they were unsophisticated? No. It means that they didn't need a recorded writing system. It was oral tradition. They used their brains a lot more than we do, because everything had to be recorded in the head. A lot of it was sacred information. You don't write that down. Somebody could read it. So that was the job of the masters of any of the professions. They had to keep all of the library in the brain. And this is the great example, or one of the great examples of something which is so ancient that the sign back there that says Ptolemaic is ridiculous. The Ptolemaic period did work, but it doesn't mean that they did this. One solid block. And reasonably flat, not perfectly flat, but also take into account that if this is so old that the surface is worn, but it's I think it's a pretty flat surface. So here we are in what was turned into a quarry of ancient masterpiece work, and we're going to walk over and have Yusuf Awiyan introduce us to this incredible
This was another
block.
shrine like the rose granite, made from black granite. And what used to happen is that in the different periods of time, that people used to come here, even during the dynasties, to cut from these stones to make their own temples, which proves that they didn't have the ability to do the machining, because taking a clear cut like this, so all he has to do is just take the edge of it and add it as another block in his own temple. And that's how they used to add the writings first. If we come closer, we can see down here that there is a part of a depiction that they were about to add, and they made it with red paint, showing Khnum and showing the, probably this is Moses, or it can be Alexander, because they all came above each other. So that's how they used to do it. You see here the figures here made in the red paint. So they used to do the paint and then cut the slab and then carve this and put it as one part of the depictions on the walls. I believe what happened here is that when they were trying to quarry it, it cracked. So when it break apart like this, because they could not cut it in a good way, that's why it's left like that. And the other markings there, on that one, that circle over there, it's not a base of a pillar, but this is how they used to mark it, to cut the millstone out of the granite. So this granite we see here is what's left after quarrying the site. You can imagine the amount of rose and black granite and milky quartz. Part of the devices here, part of the stones we find
See how flat that is
milky quartz. So there could
This
be
isn't a
other
precision
devices.
ruler, but it's a ruler for God's sake. It's a steel one. And it's probably an instrument, even though it cost me $3, more precise than what the ancient Egyptians probably had, because from what I've seen, the instruments in their tool cabinet found in the archaeological record are wooden. You can't get wood as precise as you can steel. And in the case of an engineer like Christopher Dunn, he has super precision instruments used to test the tolerances of the parts of, for example, jetting. So the Great Pyramid in the background here on the Giza Plateau, and you see this is the solid bedrock, sandstone. Most likely these are crypts or caves carved into the bedrock itself. And what this looks like is a little pyramid. And what you see on the right hand side, you see how the shaped sandstone blocks interlock with the original bedrock itself, because you see all of these indentations here made so that the blocks would fit in, like they're trying to lock in a three-dimensional way the stone, introduced stone, with the bedrock itself, and that of course makes the structure a lot stronger. And where we're heading now is towards the Sphinx and Sphinx Temple. I made a mistake. That's not the Great Pyramid, that's Menkaure, because here we have the second pyramid in the background, Khafre, and the Khufu one, the big one, great one here. And with the limestone, you can see that there's no real obvious evidence of mortar in between the limestone blocks. Limestone's not that hard a stone, relatively, but it's a lot harder than these piles of adobe. And the bottom line, of course, is the fact that the oldest construction is the finest. And where we find lack of mortar or cement-like material to glue the stones together, that is the oldest. The newer stuff, as in 2,000 years old, that's where you find mortar. Much more difficult to construct a building without mortar than with, because the stones have to fit perfectly in place. How's that for a view in the background? This is inside the Sphinx Temple, and this block of gray-black granite is perfectly vertically leveled. And it's similar to some of the stuff we see in Peru, because you see the corners, a lot of the stones are rounded over like that for strength. This is all basically red granite. Perfectly level. And you can see the weathering at the bottom that looks like that would have been the result of water. But we had Chris Dunn here with his gauge, which is accurate over 1 foot to within 1/10,000th of an inch. This surface was that flat. This is only a preliminary look at the Sphinx Temple, because we will be coming back. We have to kind of race through today. But here too, even with the weathered surface, you can see half of a degree off of level. That's because of it looks like water weathering. Here, 0.2 degrees off of being perfectly level. This is one of the pits. Could have actually been one of the water channels, because the thing is that the whole Sphinx, or the whole Giza complex, is filled with tunnels, horizontal and vertical tunnels, that were probably what were used to conduct water in ancient times, when the pyramids were the energy generating things that they were.